Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Track Car Obsession. It's been a long time since I've had an episode out, and that's because I've been in the search for this, our new engine. Stay tuned. All right, guys, I apologize for taking so long to make another video. This project is definitely not on hold. It's not canceled. I'm going as fast as I can on this, but unfortunately, it was a lot harder to find an engine and transmission than I thought it was going to be. I really tried to find one local where I could go see it and and inspect everything before paying the money and taking it home, just to find out that it's a bad motor. So I kind of gave up on that after a couple weeks, started looking a little bit farther, and I found this engine and a transmission about 2 hours away, so not too bad. This particular one, for anybody that knows anything about an LFX, which, by the way, guys, this is an LFX V6. It's the 3.6 liter made by GM, all aluminum, dual overhead cam, direct injection, extremely lightweight. They've done everything they can, and I'll even show you like the exhaust manifolds that are integrated into the cylinder heads and everything. They've gone to great extent to make this extremely light, which is why we're going to be putting it in the RX-8. So anyway, they make this for several different vehicles, some transversely mounted, and then some in a couple rear-wheel drive applications like the Camaro and the CTS from Cadillac, as well as the ATS, or possibly the ATS-V, one of those. But this particular one, like I said, I gave up trying to find a direct pull-out. So this is from an XTS, which is a Cadillac, and it is a transversely mounted model. So this intake manifold is different than what you'd find in the Camaro or the ATS or the CTS, being in the rear-wheel drive applications. These do not make as much horsepower, and the reason for that is because of the intake manifold and the way the exhaust is routed. But both of those things will be taken care of once we swap it over, so we don't have to worry about that horsepower penalty. So anyway, this has 19,000 miles on it. I paid $750. It came with a starter, power steering pump, and the alternator. Now, unfortunately, this vehicle was in a wreck, and I didn't notice it. I gave it a good inspection before I left, but I couldn't really tell until I had everything back because I picked it up at night. But there is damage to the alternator, and so I've had to order another one. I'll have that in a couple days. I'm going to go ahead and take off the manifold, because this later model XTS from Cadillac, from what I can tell on GM part numbers, it shares the same lower intake manifold as the Camaro, but the upper intake manifold is different. Whereas the old models and some of the Impalas and everything like that that use the transversely mounted motors, they actually have a different lower as well. So this just has the same lower, so I'll have to get a different I'll have to get the new upper manifold, which I've tracked down, and I'm going to order one. But we're going to go ahead and take off that upper intake manifold tonight, just to be sure that the ports are the same. So basically, let me give you a walk around of this motor. Like I said, the intake manifold is different, so we're going to be pulling that off in a minute. But then you've got these integrated exhaust manifolds, and so you don't have cast iron headers that not only add weight, but they make an engine swap very difficult depending on the application. But this should make it extremely easy, especially once I tell you guys about the kit that I'm going to be using. We won't get into that in this video, but basically the exhaust is already made. They bolt right up and this engine drops right in the car, so it's going to be super easy. You just have one downpipe on each side. Like I said, we've got the power steering there. I had them leave it on just in case I end up going with a hydraulic power steering unit. I haven't decided what I'm going to do with that yet. We'll see. I'm still doing more research on the electric power steering that comes in the RX-8 because it's a good unit. I'm just worried about excessive track use if it's going to be overheated in any way. I've got it for $750, like I said, 19,000 miles. To me, that seems like a pretty good deal. The transmission was $600, and it came out of a 30,000 mile Camaro. I'll let you know if after buying a new alternator and intake manifold, kind of what the price tally is, to let you know if it's still cheaper to go with a Camaro ready to bolt in, or to be able to pick and pull, you know, one of these Impala or Cadillac engines and buy the new parts to replace it. I'm gonna go ahead and gamble and try it, just because, like I said, I wanted to get a video up. I got impatient. I really want to get this project done, and now, of course, it's cold.
It's butt cold out here, and I'm fresh out of beer.
So it's gonna make working on it even more difficult, but we're gonna power through it. So let's go ahead and take this intake manifold off. I'll also show you the new flywheel and clutch and pressure plate that I got from Spec. It's an aluminum one that should help us drop a lot of weight. It's a very interesting looking one as well, if you haven't seen the flywheel for the LFX. All right, so before we get to tearing into the intake manifold here and pulling off like the power steering reservoir and the power steering pump and all the little wires and stuff, we're just gonna clean this whole thing up. The first thing I'm gonna do, just show you the alternator here. As you can see, this piece is broken off. I've already tossed it. Still had a idler pulley and bolt attached to it because they were all bent from where it was impacted. But as you can see, this was the front of the vehicle. This was hooked in here and it took the impact. So it busted this up. It broke the alternator housing here and then across the bottom, and that's left me with a bent stud. And so if you don't know how to get a stud out, if it's stuck, or if you've got a stripped end, because sometimes you can stick a special socket on there depending on what's on the end of the stud to pull that out. But I'm going to show you how to get a stud out of here if it's bent, or if you have this end stripped and you don't have, or if you don't have a socket to get that off. So basically what you're going to do, all right, I've jumped the gun here a little bit when checking to see what size it was. I actually already loosened it. So here's what you're gonna do. So if you've got a nut on here, you just get another nut, and you can do this to any kind of stud, but basically what you're gonna do is tighten them together, and then once they're tight, you can either take this inside one and start pulling it loose, or if these are tight enough pinched together, then you can just hit the last one, and you should be able to pull that out. A lot of times you'll have to use that method on like exhaust studs or cylinder head studs if you've got studs and they're stuck in there. But there's our bend right there, so we'll need a new stud for the new alternator. All right, so after some prying, we've got the intake manifold off. It comes off. This is your lower right here. This is what I was talking about, that should be the same as a Camaro. We'll just have to replace this composite piece on the top. Now, all of the LFX motors have the same engine ports on the cylinder heads here, so that's not going to be any different. The only difference is going to be whether or not your lower and upper intake match. And so some of the older cars, if it's like a 2011 Impala, for example, from what I've seen, it looks like the lower intake manifold and the upper are completely different from the Camaro, so you'll have to buy both. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and take this lower intake manifold off, and then we'll compare the ports to make sure that they're the same, and that all we have to do is order a new upper intake manifold to save some money. All right, so here it is, and I'll throw a picture of this up on the screen right now, and have it compared to a Camaro lower intake manifold. All right, so now that we've got the intake manifold figured out, we're gonna get back to pulling all the unnecessary pieces off this motor. Since it was transversely mounted, we're just gonna pull everything off and just leave the lawn block. And we're gonna take off all this insulation, and then eventually, we're not gonna do it tonight, but we're gonna take off these valve covers and paint them up so that the engine looks cool when it's in the car. Let's get back to it. Well, now we've basically got everything off that we're going to take off for right now. Like I said, we're going to clean up the valve covers and then paint them. Not sure if I'm going to do the same thing with the timing cover. I don't feel like taking all that stuff off, but we'll at least clean it up. And I'm going to go ahead and get this out of the way. We're going to take off the front bumper and rear bumper of the car to get ready for body modifications, as well as the engine swap. We're going to take this radiator out and go ahead and take the AC condenser out. So let's get to it. All right, so as you could probably tell with how easy that was, I've already had the front bumper off. I had to take it off in order to get the headlights out and get the wiring harness out when I was stripping everything out of the car. But in order to take the front bumper off, there's just a couple pull pins here, 2 screws, and then you've got screws down on the sides that hold in the side marker lights. When you pull those out, that also releases the front bumper, and then I believe there's a couple on the bottom as well. If you've got the under tray and everything like that. This under tray was damaged when I got it, so it may have been missing some of the pins that are normally in there. So anyway, we've got that off. We're going to go ahead and take the radiator out and the AC condenser, and I'm also going to take off the front oil coolers. I'm not sure if I'm going to leave side oil coolers yet, or if I'm going to put oil coolers in the front. It all depends on what front bumper that I go with, where the intakes are going to be. Looking for the least amount of drag with the best amount of airflow through the cooling system. So we'll go ahead and pull all of this off and then figure all that out once we have the engine in and have decided on what we're going to do with the front bumper. Alright guys, well, as you can see, to remove the rear bumper, it was extremely easy. All you have to do is remove the rear part of the inner fender wells and then take off 2 screws and 2 pins, like 2 screw pins, and the rear bumper pops right off. You have to take off the taillights too. But anyway, so we've got the bumpers off, we've got the radiator out, AC condenser, and we've got the new engine. Now, I didn't show you the transmission. There's nothing really to it. I've kind of got it put away and it's covered up, but it's just a 6-speed manual transmission straight from a Camaro. It came with the slave cylinder throw-up bearing, so that'll save me a little bit of money. And it came with a shifter, but we're going to be using a custom shifter to go in here. So I'll get the new intake manifold on the way. I've already got the alternator on the way. We'll get those pieces put on. I've got a steering wheel on the way, and I've got to get some racing seats. I'm also waiting on my fabricator, who's going to be able to do the roll cage for us. And we'll get moving now that we got parts. But thank you so much for watching. If you like it, please give it a thumbs up. And if you want to see more of this project and some other projects that we got coming up, please subscribe. Thanks again.
Take it easy.